All right, so I got a couple of people I want to talk about. For awards for senior recognition, the first one, I feel like we live in a world that values noise. A world that thinks the people who say a lot are smarter, the people who do a lot are more invested in things, and it's sometimes nice to get a reminder that there are people out there who are unassuming and careful and also intelligent and emotionally invested in their world. Which brings me to Michaela Bailey, who I fear might not really appreciate this attention that I'm bringing to her right now. But even though she didn't raise her hand to share ideas in class, her writing assignments always showed a clear understanding of not only the material that we had read, but also the issues that it raised. And she did that in the way that good written arguments should always be put together. So I was always impressed with, and it was a pleasure to work with Michaela Bailey. Second, through the course of this year, I think that only one time I had to kick a student out of the classroom. It was Billy Pinkham, and he and I never really talked about that after the fact, which I think is fine because I think we both knew and appreciated what the other was thinking about that moment. And I only bring it up now because, with the exception of that one day, Billy was a near ideal English student, and I'm sure that there's plenty of other things to say about his service or athletics or leadership or other things like that. But I'm, of course, most interested in the fact that he seemed genuinely interested in what we were reading, and that he always pushed himself to do well academically, even when he was already doing well enough. So I guess in conclusion, I just think Billy's a great student and a great person, and I was glad to have him as a student this year. I first met Jonathan Cooley when he was a freshman. I was in ed tech. I was working in Mrs. Anderson's classroom, and I spent an hour every other day with Jonathan in the library, both of us pretending that we cared about mathematics. John told me last fall that he had concerns about taking college prep English, and I told him it'd all be okay, but I was surprised with the outstanding performance that he had in class this year. And while he was loud, he was distracting, and he often had very inappropriate reactions in interactions with Mr. Reinstein. John was a diligent worker. He often had interesting things to say, and I appreciate that he always made me laugh every day. When I first met Kami Henry, I think the first thing that she said to me was an apology. I think she apologized to me for her English language skills, which I think is the only truly absurd thing I ever heard her say. She immediately showed a great knack for interpreting poetry and a genuine desire to write her own poetry. And also in her writing of her poetry, she didn't just write things that she felt, but she noticed the techniques that she saw established poets using in the writing that we were doing, and she tried to employ those same sorts of techniques and connections in her own writing, which is a really sort of smart, advanced thing to do with writing. I lived in Russia for 2 years, and I know how frustrating it can be to demonstrate knowledge in a second language, and I only wish that I had been able to do that myself half as well as I saw Kami do it every day this year. So every day throughout the school year, pretty much, Andrew Roberts White would come into the classroom in first period, and he would always ask me, "Mr. McCarthy, what are we doing today?" And honestly, I found it super annoying, and not just because, it wasn't an inappropriate question. It's a totally reasonable question, right, to ask a teacher. But the thing that I think annoyed me was because sometimes I didn't know what we were doing yet. It was 5 minutes before class started, and I was trying to figure it out. But Andrew wanted to know, and he legitimately wanted to know, and he was interested in what we were going to be doing. And over time, I came to really appreciate how much effort he was putting into his English studies, and I appreciated the results of his effort more and more as the school year went on. People who are simply pleasant to be around are great, and Andrew's definitely one of those people. When Shane James was a freshman, he used to tell me that I looked nice. I think it started with like there was a shirt that I was wearing, and he was like, "Oh, it's a really nice shirt, Mr. McCarthy." Um, but I think he was doing it to be weird, and it was effective. It totally creeped me out. And then this year came around, and while he didn't tell me that I looked nice anymore, he also didn't turn in assignments on time, which drives me nuts. But he did do every single assignment, and often did them really well. And in March, when we stopped going to school, a lot of us kind of slowed down our effort, what we were putting into things. But Shane picked it up. Shane did more work in March and April, did all of it on time, did a really good job with it. And most importantly, Shane got really into and interested in the personal dynamics at work in the play Othello that we were reading. And it was fun to watch him. He's a pleasure to have in class. And I've been glad for every day that I've had to interact with Shane this year, even if he doesn't tell me that I look nice anymore. I hear teachers sometimes complain that teaching is a thankless profession, and when I hear that, I just have to think that those teachers have never had Megan Cirilla as a student. Every day this year, pretty much without fail on our way out of class, Megan always said, "Thank you, Mr. McCarthy," every day. And I think of myself as somebody who wouldn't be affected by that, but I was. It was really nice to hear. I really appreciated it, and so I want to recognize Megan just for being a nice person and saying thank you to me, by my estimate, about 120 times over the course of the school year. Finally, the last one I want to do is Dylan Young. Dylan is, I think he'd be okay with me saying this, Dylan is kind of a weird guy. I don't know how many times this year I read something that Dylan had written, and I would think, wow, there's some really smart stuff in here, but it's also really out there. I have no idea how to grade this work. One of the more interesting things that he wrote for me was a personal essay last fall about his aspirations to drop out of society, which seems increasingly to me like the most rational ambition a person could have in our world. And so outside of the fact that he did solid, if unconventional, English work, I really appreciate Dylan and the different views that he has to share on life and the world and connections, the wide breadth of knowledge that he has. I think those things are all really important to have in a student.